Good morning, Synod. Before we come to our first item, I invite the Chair of the Business Committee to speak to us about a variation of business.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Hammond, Chancellor 273. Firstly, Synod, a housekeeping matter. Would you please mind taking your litter and rubbish out of the hall, out of the chamber, particularly at lunchtime? There's quite a lot of detritus left, and we don't have the resources to do a complete litter sweep each lunch break. So if you wouldn't mind making sure that you take your rubbish with you, that would be very good. And connected with that, if you want a fully charged voting handset in the afternoon, would you mind taking your voting handset and putting it into the chargers? They don't charge remotely, and we haven't got enough staff to run around and put them in the charging machines. So if you wouldn't mind doing that as well, that would be fantastic. We have one item of contingency business on our agenda, and a reminder that because this is listed in the agenda, we can take that at any time. I don't need to move a variation to take that contingency item. So it may be taken at any point, so just be aware of that. And you'll also have noticed in notice paper 8 that the appointment of a member of the Archbishop's Council won't be taken at this group of sessions. And lastly, Chair, under Standing Order 9, I'd like to propose a variation in the order of business. I propose that we take items 12 and 13, the sports and well-being items, directly after item 15 this morning, and that should bring us nicely back onto track.
That has my consent. Point of order.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you got the message that I was going to raise this. Martin Sewell, 390 Rochester. We're having withdrawn from the agenda the appointment of the chair of the Audit Committee, and that is an important committee. It's supposed to have 6 members. It currently only has to have 3. And to be told at this late stage that we don't have a viable candidate is actually a matter of significant import, because the Audit Committee is there to keep an eye on you. And it's really important that we have such a person. Now, I think I would ask is that we have a comprehensive statement as to what the situation is, when we might get a person to do it, and whether the current Audit Committee is confident that they can do their legitimate tasks when they're only one short of losing a quorum. So I really don't think it's good enough from a governance point of view. We're going to be discussing governance later. It's not good enough from a governance point of view just to say, oh, well, don't worry, the person who's in charge of keeping things in order just isn't there. Did they fail safeguarding? Did they take a look at this organisation and run for the hills? We need an explanation. Thank you.
Thank you for your point of order, Mr. Sewell. The item is not being moved, and the clerk will follow up as appropriate. Returning to the question of the variation of business, that suggestion has my consent. Does it have the consent of Synod? Please, would you raise your hand or otherwise indicate that using green tick if you're on Zoom. That is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
We come now to item 14. I invite our ecumenical guest, the Archbishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Estonia, to deliver his address.
Your Grace, honorable bishops, participants and guests of the General Synod, dear sisters and brothers. First, I would like to thank for this opportunity to address this esteemed Synod. Many thanks also to the kind recommender, Honorable Bishop of Rochester, our twin diocese, the Right Reverend Jonathan Gibbs. It is my custom to greet visitors from other European churches with the words, "Welcome to the future." The situation you can see in Estonia is, in my opinion, prediction, a prophecy of the future for churches in post-Christian Europe. According to the constitution, Estonia has no state church and no state religion. No church has an overwhelming majority among the population. According to the census of 2021, less than a third, 29% of the population is in Estonia identify as religious. Supporters of Christian churches constitute only 26% of the society. The majority of the population, 71%, has no religious affiliation. However, in a sense, the largest church among Estonians, the Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church, has retained its status as People's Church. We are the only church with a countrywide network of congregations and a legacy of 500 years of continual operation following the Reformation. The Estonian government has also entrusted the Lutheran Church with church celebrations and on public and national holidays. Following the trends in other European churches, I would venture to argue that soon the situation with church membership and religiosity in Europe will reach the same point that we are experiencing in Estonia for some time now. Our present today will be the future for others tomorrow. We are almost like a revelation of the future of Europe. However, people's weaker connections with the institutional church do not necessarily mean that they lack a strong emotional and spiritual bond with the church of their roots. Furthermore, there is no decrease in people's longing for the eternal stemming from their natural religiosity. It seems that the opposite is true. Decreasing membership of churches does not automatically mean an increase in the number of atheists or strengthening of some other belief systems or traditions. People desire to be free and live in a free relationship with God without the involvement of the church. Over the past 35 years, the Christian denominations in Estonia, Lutherans, Catholics, two Orthodox churches, Methodists, Baptists, Adventists, Pentecostal, the Armenian Church, and the Charismatic Episcopal Church have combined their efforts in the service of society through the Estonian Council of Churches. The resignation of even one church from this ecumenical coalition would create the risk of dissipation of the unified voice of Christians in society. In a secular society, Christian churches have an opportunity to serve as role models, above all, through strong relations in and amongst themselves. A beautiful example of this mutual love, signed in 2014, is a cooperation agreement between the Institute of Theology of Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church and the St. Platon's Seminary of the Orthodox Church of Estonia. For more than a decade, this cooperation has facilitated the pooling of resources to offer better training for the clergy of both churches. The Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church still perceives itself as a church for all the people. However, for a long time now, our status as a people's church is not based on the number of church members or baptisms, but the number of people who need the message of and touch of the gospel, with the Lutheran Church being in the best position to serve them. Obviously, we face challenges in our service of the people. There are some in the church who believe that maintaining a status quo should be the primary mission of the church in a secular society. They suggest this at every turn, particularly in relation to the complex moral and ethical issues that tend to polarize people within the church as well. They believe that we should critically oppose or assume defensive positions in relation to everything that comes from the world. However, cementing such beliefs is the opposite of what Jesus said to his disciples as he sent them out. See Luke chapter 10. If we want to effect change, we need to go into the world. We have to get our feet muddy, our hands dirty, and be prepared for the resulting discomfort. For many, this will be a lot more inconvenient than spending their days or nights on social media. I recall the meeting of primates and presiding bishops of the Porvo Communion in Tampere, Finland, where Archbishop Stephen Cottrell shared with other bishops how, in his pastoral visits, he talks to his clergy members about the length of their sleep. It is important for clergy to pay more attention to having a good rest. According to Archbishop Stephen, he advised some clergy members to sleep longer than others. The reason was that the longer a person sleeps, the less time they have for doing something stupid or outright harmful, especially in social media. I have used this good advice on some of my own clergy members as well. Hopefully this has resulted in a few of the night hours being put to a better use. Working amidst challenges were attempts to resolve complex existential and moral issues with political force in a rush have already created divisions in society. We are convinced in the Church that we need theological discussion on the very same polarizing issues. We need to create a safe zone, both in terms of time and space, in order to examine our faith, share our beliefs and interpretations, ask questions and seek answers, and find confidence in our Christian and Lutheran identity. This is why we have prepared and approved a strategy of theological dialogue for 2024 to 2029. This strategy envisages development of good theological dialogue practice and formulates the topics to be tackled. In this year, the focus will be on the authority and interpretation of the Bible and issues of Lutheran identity. The respective working groups of theologians and experts have been assembled and have begun their work. In the coming years, we will address the themes of conservation of nature or creation, sustainability of the living environment, the beginning and sanctity of life, gender and sexuality, the meaning and sanctity of marriage, the end of life, death, and eternal life. By the end of the decade, we will hopefully have been able to work through the role of the gospel and the mission of the Church in today's Estonia, as well as the Eucharist and Eucharistic communion. We strive to manifest an open and civilized debate culture between different parties and opinions within the Church, thereby providing a model for the entire society. In recent years, we cannot overlook Russia's war in Ukraine. The annexation of Crimea by Russian armed forces in the spring of 2014 has been called the start of a new or the Second Cold War. The aggressor acting against Ukraine is also our direct neighbor. In the past, this neighbor has repeatedly colonized and occupied Estonia, which, according to the Kremlin's ideas, is located in the sphere of influence of Russian world. Anxiety and political tensions in society are compounded by the fact that nearly a quarter of Estonian population is made up of Russians, with many of them being members of the Estonian branch of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is led by Patriarch Kirill, who has openly supported the war. Only 3% of the Orthodox are Estonians, and most of them belong to the Orthodox Church of Estonia under the protection of Constantinople, which is in the canonical jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, as I mentioned. As a church, we need to see people's unease and fear as an adequate response to the current events. We need to stay calm and make decisions in this time of crisis with a little emotional turmoil as possible. In preparation for a possible war, we have tasked clergy members and lay congregation leaders with development of local crisis plans that would include guidance on how and where to gather sufficient local supplies of food, drinking water, and energy sources, how to organize protection or evacuation of people, archives, and valuable assets of the church, how to continue offering worship services and pastoral care in congregations in a situation where male clergy members, including church leaders, perhaps even bishops and archbishop, are called up for military duty. How to ensure day-to-day functioning of the church and congregations, including a substitution procedure for church and congregation leaders. How to prepare congregations for independent operation, including continuing with worship services in a situation with no clergy. These are only some examples of the content of these crisis plans. The key question is if and how the Church is prepared to serve the people in anticipation, during, and after a war. At the end of the war, the Church will have to serve the people both in victory and defeat, even if we do not speak about the latter. In March 2022, a month after the start of the full-scale war, Russia had occupied 27% of the Ukrainian territory. It was 63,000 square miles. This is slightly larger than the territory of England, 50,000 square miles. At the moment, around 18% of the Ukrainian territory is under Russian occupation. This is equivalent of the combined territory of Denmark and Belgium, or Estonia and Latvia. With a new kind of rhetoric coming from the other side of the Atlantic, it is appropriate to look back on history. The Yalta Conference was held in February 1945, with the Allied victors of World War II meeting to celebrate the arrival of peace and the defeat of Hitler. The major powers negotiated peace above the heads of small nations. This meeting was followed by another 50 years of Soviet occupation in the Baltic states. Was the peace negotiated in Yalta a just peace? What kind of peace do we want for Ukraine? And for conclusion, we are shaped by where we come from, our past. However, as churches operating on the boundary between war and peace, we need to proclaim to ourselves and to the people we serve that Christians are not shaped by the past, but by the future. The future reaches out to the present. Tomorrow is today. Our salvation does not hinge on the past. Our destiny is determined by our future in Christ, which is reaching out into our present day. The eternal life offered by Christ is an eschatological gift to the world in an era of hopelessness. The content of our proclamation is eschatological hope that we have already been granted eternal life and have been delivered through faith to the risen Christ. This eschatological hope helps us overcome fear and becomes the light in the darkness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Archbishop. That concludes this item of business, and we come now to item 44. I now invite our Anglican Communion guest, the Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, to deliver her address.
Your Grace, Bishop Sarah, colleagues, esteemed guests and friends, I bring greetings to you all from the Anglican Church of Canada. As members of the global Anglican Communion, we share a deep and abiding bond of affection and fellowship that unites us in our shared ministry and mission to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ to the ends of the earth. I can tell you that many prayers are being offered from Canada for this General Synod. Friends from Canada are tuning in. Thanks be to God for the gift of technology that we can do this. I've already received so many messages from friends in the Church of Canada assuring you of our friendship and our connections. And I wonder, just by a show of hands, how many of you have visited Canada? Okay, we're basically siblings. Archbishop, the very last email I expected to receive this January was an invitation to be with you at General Synod. But let me tell you that your visit to Canada last year was a breath of fresh air. Your preaching, your teaching, and your engagement and encouragement to the youth delegates at our provincial synod has mobilized the province of Ontario to create a provincial youth advisory council. And Archbishop, they will hold you to your invitation to go on pilgrimage with you and stay at the palace. Now, I know this is a particularly trying time for you in the Church of England. But let me say that I am here with you in great humility, representing a church that over the years has had equally difficult and divisive synods filled with contentious issues and division. As I mentioned in my sermon this morning, we continue to live with the painful legacy of our church's role in the residential schools. And I'm wearing an orange feather to remember the children. Every child matters. We are doing vital work towards reconciliation through truth-telling and justice-seeking, but we continue to be humbled by our failures. Following 2 consecutive General Synods, we were not able to change the marriage canon about the marriage of same-gender couples, causing further pain to members of the LGBTQS+ persons and communities. We have arrived at a local option. I want to say that I appreciate the respectful, prayerful manner in which this synod is unfolding, and it is an honor to be with you. In conversations with members of synod, I have been asked about my view of the role of the Anglican Communion. My view is that the communion matters. We are not a congregational church. We are part of a diverse global church, which means that when one part suffers, as was our lived experience through the pandemic, through the war that the Archbishop described, as we see in the present unsettled situation in the Middle East and the ongoing situation in southern Sudan, and in all moments of internal trial, such as we have all experienced in our churches. When one part suffers, we all suffer with it. When one part rejoices, we celebrate together. Archbishop Desmond Tutu coined that beautiful term, Ubuntu. A person is a person through other persons. I need you, and you need me. The work that you are doing and the decisions you will make this week will have great importance, not only for the Church of England, but for the wider communion, especially around the important issues of safeguarding, your work on racial justice and human sexuality, and I think we avoid having these difficult conversations at our peril. I ask for your prayers for the Anglican Church of Canada. We are 30 dioceses across a vast and geographically diverse land, which many of you have visited. Some of our dioceses are very well resourced financially and with strong clergy and lay leaders. But there are also a number of very vulnerable dioceses where there are as few as 2 stipendiary clergy in the whole diocese. We have one diocese in the Anglican Church of Canada where the diocesan bishop is the only paid member of staff. Another, where if we closed a church building, people would have to travel 6 to 8 hours for communion. One of the indigenous communities I serve is evacuated every spring due to the spring floods, and for a large percentage of the year, their water is not potable. That is unacceptable in a developed country. Presently, a percentage of the national church budget goes to supporting these vulnerable communities in what we name the Council of the North. We want to continue doing this. But one of the big questions for us as a church is that we have other dioceses, not part of the Council of the North, who are also becoming vulnerable. How do we support ministry and mission in the whole Church of Canada? But let me assure you that we are not poor. We are rich because we have the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Anglican Church of Canada continues to evolve into a multicultural and multi-ethnic church. In the last several years, we've welcomed refugees, international students, and thousands of immigrants to our shores who are all filling our pews. This is a cause for great celebration. We are also enjoying the flourishing of full communion partner relationships with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada and the Moravian Church. We also have what is called Church Without Borders. This consists of the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, and the Anglican Church of Canada. And this Church Without Borders is really vital for us in this time of angst, as we anticipate some difficult years ahead. The joke about Canada becoming the 51st state has worn pretty thin. And the threat of tariffs, The reversal of the threat has real-life consequences for millions of Canadians. I ask your prayers. We are also entering a time of spiritual discernment ahead of our General Synod, which will meet in London, Ontario this June. Our General Synod, unlike yours, meets every 3 years, with the Primate, this time the acting Primate, chairing the whole of Synod. You need to know I'm really envious of this approach. But in order to change it, we would have to change the canon on the primacy, and that would take 2 General Synods with 2/3 majority in each of the houses voting, so we won't go there. The Order of Bishops, in their spring meeting, in an internal election process, will nominate between 3 and 5 candidates whose names will go forward to General Synod for election. On election day at General Synod, June the 26th, the clergy and the laity will vote for the next primate. The Order of Bishops recuses themselves for the election. When we gather for General Synod in June of this year, we will do so under the inspiring theme from Isaiah 40, verse 31, which speaks of strength, hope, and renewal. They will soar on wings like eagles. In the Anglican Church of Canada, we share a common vision of God's mission for the world, entrusted with a Christian witness in word and deed. Bearing the name of Christ, we put our collective faith in God and maintain hope in an environment of suspicion and hostility. I pray the same for you. When it seems as though we have come to the end of our strength, God, the creator of all things, will renew us and care for us, and we will soar like eagles, and our strength will be renewed. We are given a pattern to guide us in the healing of this broken world through the life, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. As light breaks through the darkness, we are invited to look beyond what we can see, living boldly as a people of resurrection hope. Believe me, God comes in unexpected ways and places, in a manger and on a cross, and through both unmasks the possibility of something new. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Archbishop. That concludes this item of business, and we move to item 15 on working class ministry.
Synod, our next business is item 15. This is the private members' motion on working class ministry. And members will need GS 2382A and 2382B, and attention also drawn again to the fifth notice paper for the financial impact of this business. I call upon the proposer of the motion, the Reverend Alex Frost, to speak to this item. Alex, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Alex Frost, 068 Blackburn. And before you hit your button, Bish, I just want to say thank you for the beautiful service of Holy Communion this morning. I was deeply moved, and I'm sure other people were as well, so thank you. I also just want to say I wonder what my old man, Jack Frost, would think about this. He died in 2013 from dementia, and in his illness, he used to tell people that I was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Stephen just said it's a sign. I can assure you it isn't. God bless you, Dad. But thanks for giving me this opportunity to open this debate on working class vocations. I'd like to thank my colleagues who have supported me and assisted me in bringing this to you today. I'd also like to thank the huge number of people who have been in touch on social media or by email, people who have shared their own experience. As a church, our credibility and our processes, our integrity is being questioned almost on a daily basis. And it is my hope that this debate can be a positive discussion, a discussion that unites all church traditions and churchmanship, theologies, that is represented here in Synod today. A debate that we can all agree on, something that builds us up and gives us hope, rather than divides and destroys us. This private members' motion is intended to be something that is achievable, to demonstrate to the wider church and society that despite our creaking old processes, we can still be relevant in the church and world today. So here we go, Synod. Working class vocations. Working class vocations incorporates many things. But to commence, I wish to dispel a couple of myths, things that a working class vocation is not. A working class vocation does not mean a diluted program of learning for someone who is a bit thick or who lacks cultural awareness. My own father was a classical pianist, and my own podcast, I have interviewed the great and the good and Stephen Cottrell. A working class vocation is not something to be less rigorous or formational. A working class vocation most certainly does not mean academic attainment is unobtainable. A working class vocation does not mean that we accept that we are subordinate to privately educated clergy or bishops. And a working class vocation does not mean we need to spend unnecessary hours defining what it is to be working class or from a working class setting. You can if you like, but I know I am working class. I don't need you to tell me. Working class people know who they are. They do not need to be means tested or interrogated for validation. If you are sat here wondering if you are working class or not, there is a fair chance that you are not. And so this private members' motion is not about presenting you with a master plan of what a working class strategy would look like. That would be for the good people in the ministry division to work out and come back to us in a year's time. However, this private members' motion is about an encouragement to the church to have a national strategy to grow leaders in working class communities that is shaped by working class people and is embraced by everyone. And at this present time, we do not have that. Over the last year or so, I have spoken to some incredible people, kindred spirits, seeking greater opportunities for working class people. One of these people is a priest named Reverend Dr. Chris Rogers, who, like me, has witnessed both the gaps and the opportunities for the Church of England. If you check Chris's fabulous work on his Urban Mission website, the revelations of his working class survey are rather revealing. For instance, the top preference for ordination learning by working class ordinands was a mixed mode of training. The second preference was placement-based training, while classroom-based options were the least popular. And when asked for their view of how they were perceived by the Church of England's institution, the most common responses were negative perceptions, with candidates believing that the Church of England saw them as risky or misunderstood or unconventional or hesitant or unsuitable and unappreciated. In my own research for this debate, I have heard some pretty dreadful stories from working class Christians who have been exploring vocations, and they have left me more convinced than ever that as a church we may be better described as the church in it and not of it. For example, let me tell you about Lee Finnegan, a working class lad adorned with tattoos across his hands, who is more Scouse than Wayne Rooney. In his vocations process, he was interviewed by a retired priest and was asked, "Lee, tell me who your favorite artist is." Lee's response was Eminem. The retired priest had no idea who Eminem was. I suspect there might be one of two of you in this very chamber in this very moment asking who is Eminem. And so for the record, let me tell you that Eminem is generally regarded as the greatest rapper of all time. He is the greatest selling artist of his genre, and he has sold over 220 million records. He is culturally relevant to the working class. And let me also tell you about Reverend Suze Osman, another working class lady who, when touring around the great theological institutions of our church, went to an open day, got out of the car to a group of ordinands playing croquet on the lawn. Something that was completely alien to her, which made her question herself and the institution that she would be working in. And then there was Michelle, a single mum training for ministry whose college expected her to be at morning prayer at precisely the same time she was taking her child to school. An impossible situation for her, and again it left her feeling vulnerable and isolated. And just in recent months, a gentleman in the southwest of England contacted me and told me he had to give up his reader training because his training took place on Saturday mornings, and his employer changed the terms and conditions because his working patterns meant he could no longer attend on Saturdays. They booted him off the course. And in my own personal experience of vocation, I was frequently made to feel inadequate. Despite running an Argos flagship store with an annual turnover of over £8 million, despite employing hundreds of people, despite 20 years of management experience, working for one of the country's biggest retailers, the biggest stumbling block to my ordination was the fact that I left school at 15 years old and had no qualifications. My old boss at Argos, a lady called Vicky Armstrong, she used to frequently challenge me, and she used to say, "Alex, if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got." And Synod, I want to say that to you. If you always do what you have always done, you will always get what you have always got. And so, what have we got now? Well, we have a shrinking, vulnerable church with reduced numbers of ordinands and people training for ministry. And I also want to say to the Church of England that this is an opportunity to be faithful, to be bold, and to be ambitious. In many urban areas of our country, the Church of England ministry is vital, where on the ground, working class communities, there is something wonderful and outstanding going on. That is fighting injustice, that is saving lives through food banks and community projects, that is educating children and standing up for the most vulnerable people in our society, like in my own parish, where we are fighting a pandemic in our children regarding ketamine. But on the other hand, our Church of England in many places is speaking a completely different language. We are existing in a parallel universe, a language of snobbery and elitism, of skullduggery and distrust, and that has to change. This PMM is a way to a new future, to new opportunities, to new people, to new ways of working and thinking, where the educators are being educated by culturally rich and talented individuals who are as diverse as they come, where God's children in this community are black, they are white, they are Lancastrian, they are beautifully brash, and they are English, and they are African, and they are Estonian, and they are Canadian. They are disabled, they are straight, and they are gay, and they are trans, and everything else that God has made them. This is a beautiful, God-centered community of working-class people that by God's grace can and will be rejuvenated. Forgive me 1 second, Bishop. You gave the Lord an extra 20 minutes. I have 30 seconds to go.
That wasn't my intention.
I know. Nobody in this synod can change what we are, or who we are, or where we are from. But I would just like to remind you, synod, where the apprentices of Jesus Christ came from. Andrew, Peter, James, and John were fishermen. Matthew worked as a tax collector. Simon was a zealot. Jesus called the working class to be his apprentices. And ultimately, synod, my final words is I want to see a well-considered debate about, a dream is a program of apprenticeships. It's National Apprenticeship Week now, this week. And we do that by recognizing the good that's going on, but adding to it. And I look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And I thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Members of Synod, we are once again rather up against time in this debate, so apologies in advance that I simply won't be able to call all those who would like to speak. But to begin with, a 5-minute speech limit. If you wish to speak, please stand or indicate in the usual way. Rachel Mann, followed by Anna Norman Walker to make her debut speech.
Rachel Mann, Manchester 171. Thank you for calling me chair. It never leaves you, she said in between sips of coffee. What? I said. The cringe. Ah, yes, the cringe. Here we were, two people who some might say have done okay. She, a professor at a smart music conservatory, me, an archdeacon, a poet, a writer. Yet despite all our social capital, we still felt it. The cringe. Still feel it. That odd sensation that people of working class heritage sometimes experience in certain cultural contexts, especially those traditionally reserved for people who went to the right sort of schools or colleges, the people who grew up with books in their house. That feeling that comes over you when you go for a big interview or are invited to a fancy dinner. The cringe. I can do a pretty good impression of a middle-class person these days. I've dusted the traces. I can play the game, but truth is, though I've learned the rules, I've never mastered the cheat codes. I feel not quite good enough. I cringe, and sometimes that means I overplay my hand, and sometimes I come across as aggressive or bumptious. I'm not saying this to make all the lovely middle-class people here feel bad, but as a reminder that accidents of birth should not be determinants in the kingdom of heaven or the church of God. The glorious company of Jesus Christ gives light to that. And to be different from the norm should be a gift. One of the joys of my background is the richness and difference of cultural reference and networks of relationships which they impart. They so readily expose so much of what we pass off as abiding Christian discourse, as barely examined middle-class morality. Education enabled me and my friend to, in a sense, change our stars. It is, I have to say, a good thing. But education is not a panacea. It does not address structural inequalities. I commend Father Frost's motion as an important first step in attending to the structural biases and half-seen presumptions of a church which has a vocation to be a church for all. To develop a strategy to prioritize working-class ministry in all its forms will better help us embody the body of Christ. Until we are led by the all sorts, the ragtag wonder of full humanity, we are a partial body. I hope the work the motion requests will bring nuance and care to what it means for working-class people to flourish in the Church of England, not least by attending to the riches of that very term, working class. I recognize, for example, that I grew up as a member of the rural working class, in a family whose heritage was in the so-called servant class. It was a different experience to the urban working class experience and the post-industrial experiences of the so-called modern precariat. I mean, goodness me, I grew up in a family where our solidarity was with the upper class. Our common enemy was the middle class. I can address the cringe to a certain extent with sheer naughtiness and my battled for privilege. And those of us of working class heritage don't want your pity or your sympathy. We want your solidarity. We want to be seen for who we are. We want to be understood and not stereotyped and not be boxed in by cheapened versions of Christianity that do not speak of the deep love of Jesus Christ. This motion offers one place to start. I commend it to you with my whole heart.
Thank you. And after you, madam, who I've already called, forgive me, Ao Audu, if he's standing to make a maiden speech, debut speech. Thank you.
Anna Norman Walker, Southwark 223. Chair, thank you for calling me. The irony of a middle-class, educated woman with a double-barreled surname speaking to this motion is not lost on me. However, it has been a very great honour to serve these past 7 years in a parish that sits among the lowest 20% of deprived areas of the country. Streatham has seen some gentrification, affectionately referred to as St. Wreatham by some. But there remains a strong working class presence in our community. We have an excellent relationship with the Nehemiah House project, which sits within our parish. The house is populated by men who are trying to rebuild their lives after release from prison or while in recovery from addiction. One of the covenants that the men make as part of the project is to worship at a local church, and they often choose to worship with us at St. Leonard's. It is a joy to witness many of them come to and grow in faith and become embedded in our community. Among their number is Ronnie, whose love for God has an infectious effect on the other residents. A week doesn't go by without Ronnie bringing along a friend who he's encouraging to go deeper with God. And he has a really effective ministry. Not only that, but there's a growing cohort gathering around Ronnie on Sundays who are not from the house, but are nevertheless a lot more like Ronnie than the vicar is, or rather the pie and liquor, as they like to call me. There's Pete and Giles and Ali and Joey, and Ronnie is their man. Ronnie senses a vocation, and we in the parish have been doing what we can to encourage him to explore his gifts, and he is being well supported by the diocese in his exploration. But he's already expressing an anxiety about whether his face will fit, whether his accent will let him down, or whether he will be considered educated enough to manage any sort of academic training. It is for people like Ronnie that this motion sets out to serve. Not only is it generous and inclusive, but it takes seriously our belief in the incarnational God who became like us to reach us. Friends, if we're serious about reaching all people with the good news of God's love for them in Christ, then we need the help of people like Ronnie. So let's make it possible. I support this motion.
Eo Adu, and then the Archbishop of York. Speech limit is still 5 minutes.
Ayo Audu, Oxford 192, my inaugural. Thank you for calling me, Chair. Friends, as we meet small groups in my parish are seeking to cast a fresh look at the Lord's Prayer, challenging ourselves to say the prayer, all 66 words of it by noon daily. To deepen our study, we use an excellent, if accessible, new book titled Praying from the Heart, the Lord's Prayer for Everyone, written by one Stephen Cottrell. Whilst writing this speech, I was struck by the opening word in that prayer. Not mine, not yours, but If it is to be a reality, as we heard from Archbishop Anne during her sermon at Communion earlier, that we are image carriers of God, even if we are on a journey to it being an eschatological reality, then we are called, I believe, to challenge the primal impulse which seeks to impede access to ordained ministry for those who, by reason of a perceived socio-demographic characteristic, or to name it, class, find themselves on the other side of the divide. I speak in support of the motion to challenge the implicit cultural lens through which candidates for ordained ministry are viewed, the screening effect of which lens plays out in a number of ways. In my case, it resulted in the dubious honor of being reported by the Bishop's Advisory Panel advisors that I bore no resemblance to the person described in my sponsoring papers. Synod, surprised? I was aghast. Apparently, my undoing was to have hesitated, then stumbled over the name and author in responding to the question, what is the name of the last theological book you read? It would appear my life journey's acquisition of 2 first degrees, 2 master's degrees notwithstanding, my having failed to acquire or demonstrate the requisite airs and graces at BAP was taken to imply a deficit in the mental acuity required to undertake theological formation. That was nearly sufficient to bar my selection. But I am here. I share the foregoing to highlight the predominant middle-class proclivities of the Church of England. Whilst that tendency in itself is not a bad thing, however, when it functions to bar pathways for those on the other side of the color bar, or the class bar, or a combination of both, when that happens, we are no longer the Church of England, but that for a subset of it. When Christ died, the curtain in the temple tore from top to bottom, forever guaranteeing access for all. Friends, this motion seeks to do the same. Synod, allow it.
Synod, I feel... sorry.
The Archbishop of York, followed by Gary Waddington, after which the speech limit will be 3 minutes.
Stephen Cottrell, York 002. So, Synod, I feel an overwhelming need to quote from Eminem to you, who I love. So will the real Slim Shady please stand up? And also, I want to say to Alex that I didn't sign your PMM because I made a decision when I became Archbishop that I wouldn't sign any PMMs, but I really, really wanted to sign yours, and I'm absolutely delighted to be standing here and speaking in this debate. And I do want to pay tribute to you, not just what you've brought here in this motion, but I first came across your ministry through that BBC thing that you were involved in some years ago. And I have been so moved by just catching a glimpse of your ministry in your parish. I thank you for showing us what is best about parish ministry in some of the most challenging but beautiful bits of our country. Like you, Alex, I too, I went to a secondary modern school in Essex where you left at 15 and got a job. I got 3 O-levels, and at my school, if you got 3 O-levels, you were considered to be something of an intellectual. But it still wasn't the 5 you needed to swap to the grammar school and get some A-levels. Mainly because I was work shy. A school is only as good as its teachers, and next door to the boys' secondary modern was a girls' secondary modern. And with two friends, we blagged our way into the girls' 6th form. And I turned my 3 O-levels into 3 A-levels. And I was the first boy from my school ever to get a degree. But the thing is, the degree was from a polytechnic. So when I entered into the discernment process for theological education, I was told that I couldn't do a degree in theology because in order to do a degree in theology, you needed to already have a degree. Well, you can see. There are so many in our system inbuilt prejudices and barriers and cultural difficulties. I wasn't brought up going to church. I know what it's like to be outside of the church. I can just about remember it. And you have to learn the culture of the church, and many, many, many people are turned away. Some years ago, I led a mission to the wonderful parish of St. John's South Bank in Middlesbrough, another very challenging and very beautiful community. And I had a motley, Michael Beasley, is Michael Beasley here? He's bunked off, he's perhaps not on the bishop's rota, but the Bishop of Bath and Wells was a student on the mission team with me, so he can verify this story. And there were ordinands, priests, a few religious, and we did our stuff each night on this mission, and then usually ended up in the pub over the road from the church, and got friendly with the people in the pub. And they said, you must come back on Saturday night because that's karaoke night. So sure enough, we went back on Saturday night. The pub was absolutely packed, far more people in the pub than had ever been at the mission events during the week. And we were encouraged to sing a song. I got up and sang a song on the karaoke. I won't tell you what it was. And when I'd finished singing in this packed pub, the DJ over the other side of the pub said to me, over the microphone, he said, "Why do you sing songs that nobody knows?" And I started explaining, well, I grew up in the 70s, that's my era, that's why it was probably a bit of ABBA, that's why I chose that. And he goes, no, in the church. Why do you sing songs that nobody knows? And he wasn't talking about the hymns that we sing. He was talking about our language and our culture. And there I was in this crowded pub saying to him, apologizing for the barriers that we unwittingly put in the way of so many people from receiving the good news of Jesus Christ. And I said to him, ever the evangelist, I saw the opportunity as well. I said, look, I believe that what I found in Jesus Christ is good news for my life, good news for your life, and good news for everybody here. And I believe that's what the church is for. We are for living and sharing this good news for everyone. But we have a lot to learn. And I did say to him, please join us. We really, really need your help. So Synod, I hope that we will take this motion very seriously indeed, so that we really can be a younger and more diverse church.
Gary Waddington, who has 5 minutes, and then the lady at the front there, speech limit will be 3 minutes.
Gary Waddington, Leeds 139. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Father Alex for securing this debate. And I want to warmly encourage the Ministry Development Board in their future reflections, for I recognise so much in this paper which is true and honest, from how finance is a barrier, a major barrier, and often continues to be throughout ordained life if you have come from a working class background. But most of all, there are nuances here that deserve our attention and reflection. From what is working class, and we've heard already that's not easy to necessarily pin down. But that's a reminder for us to not fall into lazy stereotypes and tropes. I echo Alex's plea that in any pathways that are developed, these are not simply training light for somehow the academically unable, that entrench actually social differences and exacerbate othering, rather than maximising potential, celebrating diversity, and bringing learning opportunities for all. For 10 years before my present post, I was the vicar of an urban priority parish in Portsmouth. The people were amazing, they were fantastic, they had huge life skills. But I want to name something which I think is often missing in our reflection. Half the adult population were functionally illiterate. We here are used to dealing with reams of paper. In my last parish, I lost track of how many times people who had to suddenly fill in a form or write something down had forgotten their glasses. I think we need to be attentive in the United Kingdom, where 8 million people, that's 20% of the adult population, have a reading age of at or less than we expect of a 9-year-old. There is therefore also a danger that we need to be attentive to. I think it's kind of one of the elements of the factor that Rachel Mann called cringe that I recognise very well. That there is a danger we become nice middle-class people who, albeit wanting to be nice and helpful, are in fact condescending or patronizing, that we pat people metaphorically on the head. It's a feeling I've known well over the years I've been ordained. For, dear friends, if I'm honest, good old-fashioned snobbery is alive and well in the Church of England today. Behind people's backs, I hear how candidate X is just the right sort of priest to go to in this state parish, but not quite the sort of person who should come here. Or dare I say it, having followed the Archbishop of York, how on earth did someone get to be a bishop when you know they sound a bit estuary? Why is this important to me? You might think a team rector in a major parish church in a leafy and affluent suburb of Harrogate is falling into the trap of being patronising himself. But I grew up in an end of terrace council house. I qualified for free school meals. My parents never read me bedtime stories because they couldn't read the books. I wrote my own absence notes if I was off sick from school. And I say all of that not for pity, but to recognise amongst many from a working class background another element of that cringe that we suffer and hear in our own heads even today is that people like us don't get to do things like this. People like us don't get to be ordained. People like us don't sit and speak amongst those who are better. It is a story we tell ourselves that defeats ourselves. And the importance for me of this debate is that it will help change the narrative so that we hear stories from those who stand here who speak not despite their background, but because of it. And that for children who come from working class communities who don't think that people like them can be bishops or archbishops, priests or deacons, wardens, intercessors, that we say loudly, yes, you can.
After the next speaker, I'm going to go to Zoom for Nadine Daniel. 3 minutes speech limit.
Jodie Stowell, London 165. I remember growing up with particularly my mum having a sense of shame around being poor. Now, I know being poor and being working class, they're not absolutely the same thing, but for us, that was part of the mix. Now, that was something that I did not inherit. To my parents' credit, I didn't have any shame about coming from a council estate, being poor, having second-hand clothes, not having a car until sort of later on. My background is city, Scottish, work ethic, proud in that sense. And so I've lost count of the times that in the setting often of the church where I have been, there's euphemisms. I mean, I've been definitely called too big for my boots a number of times. The other word that's often used is prophetic. Maybe that's a way of saying you're acceptably bolshy and opinionated, but you're only acceptably so as long as you stay slightly on the margins of the structures, because to have you centrally would be a little bit too difficult for us. I did my undergrad theology as an independent student through Spurgeon's College, And it was there that I received my call to ministry. I was always in an Anglican church. And so I trotted off really happily to Cambridge, thinking that the elitism and the pomp wouldn't be taken seriously. I was so glad because I got to use Cambridge University and it was so wonderful. I was disabused of the idea that the elitism wasn't going to be taken seriously because it was absolutely inherent to that structure. And I wore my Anglian Ruskin hoodie really proudly the more and more that I was there. But mostly I want to say that don't support this because you are doing something nice to poor people or to working class people, because actually God comes from the places which are the small, the unseen, the marginalized. We've heard that earlier on in terms of the one who comes from Bethlehem, from the littlest clans. You will gain something if you receive people as they are and don't try to change them into your image. Thank you.
Nadine Daniel on Zoom, could I just ask at this point if anyone is standing to speak against the motion? Sit down if you're wishing to speak in favour. Thank you. Nadine Daniel and then the Bishop of Chester. Nadine Daniel on Zoom, please. Bishop, let's come to you and then we'll try again in a moment for Zoom. Bishop of Chester, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Tanner, Chester 12, although in this context, perhaps more relevantly, the Chair of the Ministry Development Board. Can I say how profoundly I welcome this motion and honour you, Alex, in raising it. I welcome the essential work being done, not least in the Let Justice Roll report, and I just want to pay tribute to Sharon, a different Alex, and Rebecca, who wrote that. We in the board and I personally are committed to cooperate with Alex in this work and with the recommendations on pages 7 to 9 of that report. And indeed, thank you, Alex, for mentioning Chris Rogers' vital work as well. I'm not sure if this is the first time a lead bishop in a particular area has seconded a PMM, but I was proud to second this PMM coming before you, Synod. I just want to note that there are 2 things I would draw out of the PMM for Synod's attention. Firstly, the question of vocation, and second, the matter of listening. The motion mentions both lay and ordained vocation, and both matter, but please notice that vocation for the Christian is not just vocation to some explicitly ministerial roles. We in the church need to be those who champion others, whatever they are called to, in order that they may be salt and light across our communities. I believe this is part of our prophetic role. But please, Synod, do not impose middle class solutions on issues which are faced by those who are in the working class. For example, either by assuming that being working class is necessarily to be disadvantaged, which it is very easy to do, and I've heard some echoes of in our debate already, or by pretending there are no social injustices which need to be addressed. Our posture must first and foremost be those who listen and then lend our support in order that we might be allies and offering the dignity to all that they have from our Father and theirs. Listen to the situations in which people find themselves, particularly where we end up pigeonholing people, not least those who are in working class. For example, if those from working class vocations find themselves predominantly in self-supporting roles, we need to be alert and listen. This morning has been a joy to me as one who was born in Canada. Perhaps we need to adopt the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, which, if memory serves, is at the end of September. I will wear orange if you will. There would be so many foci in that, but perhaps this PMM leads us to realize that this can be an area of focus. Synod, we are unconsciously biased even about the things in which we are unconsciously biased. This PMM opens our eyes to one of the most vital issues in front of us, and I commend it with all my heart and commit myself to cooperation.
Synod, I'm going to try again for Nadine Daniel on Zoom and then call Jonathan Macy. And I'm then going to need to start thinking about closing the debate. So if we can get onto Zoom, we can. Nadine Daniel, 3 minutes. We're not getting any sound from Zoom. Can anything be done about that? Nadine, I'm sorry, I think in view of the time, we're going to have to press on. So Jonathan, before I call Jonathan Macy, could I ask you another question, Synod? Are there any members of the House of Laity particularly wishing to speak? Lady right at the back, after Jonathan.
Southwark 224. Jonathan Macy, Chair of NECN and Estates Vicar. Years ago, I trained in an Oxford college, and it was really, really nice. But it always jarred a bit as it hit the reality of my past. I'd had 15 years in the care sector with people who have learning disabilities, and I had had over 10 years in churches in the estates of South East London. And this jarring found its focus and its explanation when I was a curate and a teen vicar. The 2 years I had in Oxford hadn't trained me for what I encountered in South East London, other than funerals, dead people. Think about that. In the subsequent years, I was on various committees, and it's been an honour sort of working higher up the food chain as the parish pleb who's got that wisdom of the underbelly of the grime of the parish system. The jarring came back. When it came to issues of poverty and class, there was a clear disconnect between how I thought and others in the room. They had lenses that just seemed a bit skewed. They just didn't get it. Therefore, all these well-intentioned initiatives that were coming down were flawed. They just didn't see it. You have to have true and proper working class people in positions of influence who haven't been shaped by the system. But you can't get them in those roles if you can't get the first foot on the first rung of the first ladder in the first place. If we want England to have the gospel, that includes areas of poverty, and you have to have leaders from areas of poverty who are seen and grown and recognised and listened to. This is an excellent starter point, Alex. It can't be the end. Please back this. Thank you, Synod.
Synod, after the next speaker, I will be testing your mind for closure on this item. 3 minutes.
Nicola Denyer, Newcastle 368. It's a joy to speak in this debate as somebody who grew up in a new town in Newcastle Diocese in a council house. And it's wonderful to have heard stories from other people with similar backgrounds that you wouldn't automatically know if you looked around this chamber. So it's been really, really good to hear those kind of stories this morning. I only started going to church in 2012 and didn't have a clue what anybody was talking about when I walked through the door. I didn't understand the language. I didn't know when to stand up or sit down. And nobody in my church spoke like I did. Even though it's in Newcastle, it's very rare to hear somebody at the front of a church in Newcastle with my accent. And I would imagine that that could be said to be the same in York, in London, well, maybe not London, in Manchester, in other places. And often when I go around, and part of my job means that I get to go around and preach at different churches across the diocese, people come up to us afterwards and say, Pet, it's lovely to have somebody that talks like us up the front. Now, obviously, accent doesn't say much, but it does to those people in the pew. And I think that this allows us to start to consider about how those people in the pew get a voice and get enabled and encouraged in their vocations, of which they all have. And believe you me, people in working class communities may have a deeper knowledge and love of God than some other people in more privileged circumstances. They live in pain, in hunger. They live without things that other people would expect to have. They live knowing that they go to bed and their kids are hungry. These people know God, and these people all have a vocation to lead others to Jesus. So this motion in front of us is a real honour to support, and I'm so overjoyed to hear other stories that support it today. Thank you.
Synod, I am advised that, God willing, we may have a Zoom link now, so I am going to postpone testing your mind on the closure to allow Nadine Daniel to speak. Nadine, I did give you 3 minutes. If you don't feel you have to use all of it, that would be helpful. So Nadine Daniel.
Nadine Daniel, 347 Liverpool. Thank you, Chair. I'm incredibly grateful. Father Alex, thank you. Mother Rachel, thank you. I was born and brought up in Norris Green, which is a council estate in North Liverpool. I give thanks every day for the fact that mine was the generation, the last generation, that had full social mobility. So I was able to go to a direct grant grammar school that was run by the Church of England. My schoolmates included Heidi Thomas, James, Sarah, James Thornton, and our own Jane Patterson. But I was the kid that travelled the furthest because I came from an estate. They taught me to speak nicely. When I started my job at the bar, the cringe really kicked in. It didn't matter how many degrees I had. When I started my job as the National Refugee Officer here at Church House, boy, did the cringe factor kick in. Not only was I a woman, not only was I Northern, the only national officer from the Northern Province at the time, I was working class. And that never leaves you. What is tragic is that those generations that have come behind Rachel and myself are far less mobile within the church, within society in general, than we have been able to be. But it still kicks in. When the Bishop of Warrington finally got round to interviewing me pre-BAP, after 5 postponements of that interview, she turned me down. To quote her, "I'm not hearing the right language, Nadine. I don't really know who you are, Nadine." So I've sought to, anyway, to serve God. And that's why I'm here at General Synod. Alex, this motion is timely. Please support this motion, Synod.
Synod, I do now wish to test your mind on whether item 15 has been sufficiently debated, and I put the closure on this item. All those in favour, please show. Against? That is carried. Alex, I invite you to respond to the debate, and you have up to 5 minutes.
I would like to say to you thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank River Island for this off the sale rail. 20 quid. And when I got to the till, there was a further 20%, so £15.80. Delighted. I also want to thank my dear diocesan bishop for not bringing up a 3.5. That's deeply appreciated. But seriously, I want to thank all of you for moving me greatly in this debate. And Rachel, man, you are both a beautiful person and a beautiful orator. And thank you for telling everybody that being different should be a gift. It really is. And Anna, thank you for your story and sharing with me Ronnie. Please do pass on my love and prayers to Ronnie, and if he needs any encouragement, then I'd love to have a chat with him. Ayo, good man. Thank you for speaking so eloquently. God is our Father. This is a church for all, regardless of race and class. Stephen, thank you for not signing, but signing the PMM. Thank you for showing your knowledge of Eminem. You had one shot. You didn't miss the opportunity. Gary, you moved me immensely talking about functional illiteracy. Many people in my community are of that ilk, and I'm delighted that we can support a charity called Read Easy. Please do check that out. Jodie, you are just Jodie, aren't you? You're just magnificent, and thank you for your honesty about being bolshy and prophetic. I've been there. I understand where you're coming from. To Bishop Mark, thank you for telling us that you're up for the challenge and that you're excited to be venturing this. And again, thank you to Reverend Chris Rogers. And Jonathan, thank you for telling us that what your life in Oxford did not prepare you for, and for saying that we need to find ways of enabling working class people to contribute to our discussions. Nick, all right, lass, at the back there, thank you for reminding us how weird church can feel for the uninitiated. I've been there. I still stand up in all the wrong places. And Nadine, a wonderful point about social mobility. Thank you for that. And I really want to thank, really, to be honest, the people of my parish, where I have the utmost honour to be the vicar, to my colleague, Reverend Cat, and to the real working class people who teach me every day. They teach me so much. To Jenny Swears a Lot. You might be wondering why we call Jenny Swears a Lot Jenny Swears a Lot. Well, Jenny swears a lot. And to Mark Marsden, a raging alcoholic who keeps me grounded and teaches me about his life and his challenges and how we can try and overcome them together. And to the Devlin family, thank you for allowing me into your life to learn about the death of your beautiful daughter. If you do nothing else today, just please go and Google Kelsey Devlin. That would do me an enormous favor, and forgive me for stealing that opportunity. But my final thoughts of this is, let's tear down the curtain to what we have. Let's sing songs that people can be familiar with, whether it's Eminem, Bach, or my own favorite band, Depeche Mode. We can, if we want to. We can change the culture. We can embrace what we have. We can change the education, but embrace what we have. We can change the finance. We're not short of a bob or two. We can do that if we choose to do it. I really am very grateful. I never thought I would ever be in this position. And by God's grace, I am. And I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Synod, I now put item 15 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. Thank you, Synod. We move to next business.
Not the message.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Synod. We come now to two linked items, items 12 and 13. You will need with you order paper 3 from yesterday. You will also need notice paper 9 with a financial memorandum and you will need GS 2381. We have a little bit of a conundrum ahead of us. We have a presentation, a motion, and an amendment, and it is more than my life's worth to keep Synod from their lunch. Therefore, we shall need to be focused and work together as a team. I promise that's the last sport-related joke I shall make. Please do be aware, though, that the speech limit will be 3 minutes from the start, and I may need to reduce it to 2 minutes. I therefore invite Bishop Libby and her team to make the presentation at item 12.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here to talk about sport and wellbeing ministry. As you've heard, we've got time pressures, so I'm going to shelve most of the presentation that we've prepared and maybe just focus on 3 of the main take-homes that we're keen for you to hear and to understand. You've got it in your papers, anyway, the report. There's a summary of the report that I undertook with Andrew Parker, and the full report is online in the Church Hub as well. This is what I was going to speak about. Just give you a little bit of context about sport and wellbeing ministry, a little bit about the research overview, some key findings, and then we'll focus on these 3 takeaways with maybe, if we've got time, a few conclusions. I'll just hover over the key findings just so you can see those highlighted there. We did this report based on the work of the 8 pilot dioceses over 3 years as part of the National Sport and Wellbeing Project, and we had some really interesting findings from that work. And just to highlight those very quickly, we can see that it stimulated sport and wellbeing ministry in the Church of England and beyond, and it showed that there were some clear benefits to the adoption of the strategic approach to sport and wellbeing ministry at diocesan level. And it also showed how those 8 pilot dioceses were able to create some new partnerships with schools, community and local authorities, and develop faith pathways and potentially new worshipping communities. And it also showed that we could reach new unchurched populations in those local communities, especially young people. And the overall, I suppose, conclusion from it really that sport and wellbeing ministry has a potential to help the Church of England and dioceses achieve their strategic aims to make the church younger, more diverse, and enable the growth of a mixed ecology. So the 3 take-homes I'll focus on now are these 3 here. And we can see in the first one here that I'm really keen to understand that we need to frame sports ministry in much broader terms. And the research sort of highlighted a number of principles that support of successful development and growth of sport and wellbeing ministry in the diocese. And this has included reconsidering the traditional perceptions of sports ministry and the importance of adopting more nuanced terminology, such as sport and well-being ministry. It's portraying a more inclusive portfolio of activities, not to put people off who do not see themselves as sporty. And it's also designing the activities for the church, the unchurched audiences within those communities, which are fun, easily accessible to all, low cost, and demand-led. Also involve working in partnership. So thinking with other forms of ministry and mission, ministry initiatives and ventures such as new worshipping communities and fresh expressions. Also to think about having a cross-cutting role across church schools, local communities and other local churches. And that's also to be seen in other church agendas such as children and young people, families, disadvantaged communities, community cohesion and even in new housing developments. The second take-home is the need to take sports ministry seriously. While well-developed models are yet to be fully evaluated, overall, even with a limited engagement, by creating multiple local demand-led offer, sport and wellbeing ministry projects within a diocese can attract between 150 and 200 people a week. Data from Sportily in Gloucester from 2022 highlights that through 23 weekly sessions, sport and wellbeing teams delivered on average to 400 participants a week, with a total of 23,000 participants over the course of a year. If you exclude the school-based activities, Sportly facilitated formal connections with over 1,200 individuals. And these figures are constantly improving. And also in terms of well-being, it's important to see that. So while well-being will often attract less participants, maybe between 10 and 30 per session, they can be put on much more frequently and alongside other church-based activities such as services, cafes, parent and carer and mother and toddler groups. And over a week, if you're doing different activities, this can end up doing quite a decent number of people. Also, just to note that at Gloucester and Ely dioceses produced evidence that participants who did attend the Sport and Wellbeing Ministry helped participants not only enjoy life, undertake more exercise and sport, but 30% wanted to learn more about God, and 77% thought more about the Christian faith, having done the activity. And we know that based on previous research carried out in London in 2015, there's a continually strong demand from parishes and dioceses for well-developed sport and wellbeing models and approaches. Thirdly, the need to recognise and understand the ability of sport and wellbeing ministry to meet three key strands of the Church of England's vision and strategy. The majority of stakeholders who we spoke to regarded sports ministry as a key mechanism to help the Church deliver the vision and strategy. There was strong agreement that the Church's vision, along with sport and wellbeing ministry per se, were strongly aligned. Some even believed that dioceses could learn from sport and wellbeing ministry about how to successfully engage children and young people and those from diverse backgrounds. And the data broadly supports this. Sport and Wellbeing Ministry can track healthy numbers of children and young people through a range of activities, from in-school, out-of-school clubs, holiday camps, and local one-off events. Case studies in Norwich and Ely indicated a relatively new but well-modelled parish-based sport and wellbeing ministry can easily engage 200-plus children and young people a week. Across multiple sites, you can attract over 1,000. So these really provide significant opportunities to engage relatively large numbers of young people and to facilitate the development of deeper relationships with both children and the parents, and to create a fresh church presence in the community. Where that provision is demand-led and delivered within a local community, it will also attract diverse ranges of people, although this might require many types of provision to achieve this. We can see that it attracts people from all age groups across the life spectrum, including older people and women and girls. We know from other research that community-based sporting activity also reaches traditionally difficult-to-reach people, who often feel comfortable being active in a church environment. So sporting activity often builds the bridging capital and integrates people of different backgrounds. And Sport and Wellbeing Ministry also offers a mixed ecology approach to church, although this needs strengthening. This has been modelled best by Sportley and Gloucester. They're creating new worshiping communities and fresh expressions of church within this mixed ecology of the church in each area that they operate. The Sport and Wellbeing Ministry is where the missional outreach, the evangelistic content, and the church into which people are invited resides. And Sport and Wellbeing Ministries, we found throughout the research, knew the need to create and develop strong models connecting participants to the local church, or creating that fresh expression. Just finally, to offer a few conclusions, which we can see there before I finish. So we can see what the office bishops, senior diocesan staff, Central Church of England institutions, parishes, and sports ministry organisations' key insights and learning in relation to the development of sport and wellbeing ministry. It supports the notion that sport and wellbeing ministry can and should play a significant role in the mission ministry of the Church of England going forward, and demonstrates how the project provides a timely and culturally relevant platform or vehicle to re-engage populations and communities across the different geographies and demographics. And it emphasises the need for an intentional investment to allow sport and wellbeing ministry to develop and flourish. I'll finish there and pass over to Bishop Litty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on the Bishop of Derby to speak to and move item 13. Bishop, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Libby Lane, Derby, 15, and lead bishop for sport. Mark was part of the reporting group that produced the report that you have had access to, and we're very grateful to him for flexing his diary so he could be with us today. I'm passionate about sport because I love it, but even more so because I believe that we are all beautifully and wonderfully made, however we are made, reflecting the glory of God in our physicality as well as our spirituality. For God saw all that had been made, and it was very good. Look around. God saw all that had been made, and it was very good. To enjoy our bodies, to benefit from keeping our bodies healthy, to celebrate the remarkable achievement of bodies, to know ourselves connected to one another and the rest of creation through physical activity is not only good for us, it glorifies God. Through engagement with sport and physical activity, the Church of England is building the kingdom of God. And we might find opportunity to share the good news of Christ. I warmly welcome the work that the Sport and Wellbeing Project has done, exploring how sport can further the mission and evangelism of our church, and I commend the report to you. Really pleased to note the geographical distribution of the pilot dioceses: Birmingham, Blackburn, Ely, Gloucester, Guildford, Norwich, Rochester, the Kensington area in London. They reflect a rich variety of lived experience and demographic and approaches to sport and well-being. And many other dioceses not explicitly included in those pilot projects, the Diocese of Derby included, will be engaged in sport projects that bring transformative service to their communities and open up opportunities to share the gospel. And I hope we'll hear many stories of those in this debate. As Lord Spiritual, I'm aware that sport provides significant opportunity to connect the Church's work with national public policy. Currently, I'm hoping that the ongoing work of the Ministerial Task Force on Child Poverty, which will publish a National Child Poverty Strategy in the spring, and the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which we expect to arrive in the House of Lords in the coming months, will include sport as an aspect of a rich and full life for all our children. Sport is part of our national and local identities. It's a significant contributor to our economy. It enhances physical and mental health. It can foster a sense of cohesion and community. It offers positive, meaningful outlet for often excluded and disadvantaged groups. I'm part of the Episcopal Prisons team with particular responsibility for young offenders, and I've seen excellent work using sports with boys in custody, such as the project providing activity, training, continuity beyond custody, the Young Offenders Institute at HMP Park, in partnership with rugby charities. But too often, I've seen in prison limited access, particularly for women and children, boys and girls, in a system not listening to their specific needs. We know that others suffer unequal access to the opportunities that sport offers. Research has identified, for example, that disabled adults are twice as likely as non-disabled adults to be physically inactive. 10 years ago, the Diocese of London commissioned a report examining the interface between sport and Christianity. And one of its findings demonstrated that church-based sport and physical activities featured above average engagement by girls and women, and intergenerational engagement was commonplace. Across so many demographics, our church would be greatly enriched by greater contact and engagement that sport can offer. Sport reduces social isolation. It's an integral component of cohesive and confident communities. A report commissioned by the Culture and Sport Evidence Programme found that participation in organised sport and exercise figures a therapeutic benefit to psychosocial health, including improved cognitive function, well-being, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. Sport makes us happy. Endorphins are released through exercise, and it enables us to connect with our peers, our colleagues, our neighbours. We're committed to be a church that is younger and more diverse. A recent report from Sport England estimated that 55% of 16 to 25-year-olds engage in sport weekly. and that 88% of children aged 5 to 15 play sport regularly. What an opportunity to offer this potentially fruitful way to engage children and young people precisely at the time when we as a church are seeking and struggling to reach those self-same children. Sport presents an opportunity to take further steps towards our aim of constructing a mixed ecology, of reimagining worshipping communities working alongside our inherited congregations. We have a well-established tradition of sports ministry in the church, dating back more than a century in different ways. We're blessed to have active and enthusiastic mission activity in this area already. We're grateful for the church's partnership with national parachurch organisations, including Christians in Sport, Sports Chaplaincy UK, KIC, Ambassadors, Football GB and Scripture Union. And I would urge that these collaborations are nurtured and expanded. I would advocate that we complement ad hoc local sports ministry with strategic initiatives and partnerships, diocesan-wide, bolstered by long-term and sustainable funding from the national church. This is a good time for intentional investment in the potential of sport and physical activity for promoting physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Sport and physical activity, more generally, is good in and of itself. It has the power to be fundamentally transformative at every stage of life, and it has the potential to be a fruitful tool for evangelism. So, I look forward to our following debate and hope that Synod will enthusiastically support this motion. Thank you.
Item 13 is therefore open to debate. I am minded to take 2 speeches before moving to the amendment. The speech limit will be 3 minutes. I call Helen King, please, followed by the Bishop of Birmingham.
Helen King, Oxford 378. I'm probably among the members of Synod least qualified to speak in this debate, as my own experience of sport includes deliberately spraining my own ankle in order to get out of hockey. And when I see images of energetic young people being lively on the website for the Church of England's National Sports and Wellbeing Project, I feel the urge to go to a corner with a book. And yet, I want to speak in this debate. That's because at a recent Deanery Synod meeting, I heard about St. Peter's, Aylesbury. We are not a pilot diocese for the Sport and Wellbeing Project, but St. Peter's is part of our diocesan estates ministry network. It started up from a breakfast church initiative about 5 years ago. Food is another way of getting people into churches, by the way. It's not just sport. But before I share what they're doing, I'm concerned about the way that GS 2381 focuses more on sports ministry than on well-being. There's a lot about numbers. We've just heard now about fewer people per group in a well-being group than a sports group. It talks about success. The language is about finding the sweet spot of how this can contribute to a growing church. We've got strategic aims and buy-in and sustainable business development and standardized systems and processes. And you know, that really worries me. We haven't got any theology. I know in this synod we do tend to say, can we have some more theology? Can we have some more theology here, please? For St. Peter's, their interest in well-being and exercise comes from a different direction. It's not about sport. It's about a focus on health, hope, and wholeness through fun, faith, and fitness. The theology of the body is important to St. Peter's, Aylesbury. Their vicar, Pete Wheeler, tells me, our theology of the body is not only as a sacred space where God chooses to meet with us, but something that is fully endorsed by God in the bodily incarnation, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It is therefore anti-Gnostic. declaring that our own bodies, how we look after them and what we do with them, really matter to God and how we live a whole and fulfilled life. For reasons of time, I can only refer to one of their initiatives, Revelation Fitness. Free classes for all abilities, including chair-based classes. Each weekly class has a Bible theme, usually part of a series, developed and explored as the class exercised together, to music or not. There's a cool down with a time of reflection and prayer. After the class, there's the opportunity for prayer ministry and healthy smoothies. I think what's happening in a church like this is an inspiration, and I'd urge a reset from sports to well-being, maybe from a focus on children and young people, which is all the vision and strategy stuff, to adults, and to something driven not by the rhetoric of management and success measured by numbers, but on a rich theology of the body. Thank you.
Michael Volland, Birmingham 007. This is my debut speech. I speak in favour of this motion. Sports and Wellbeing Ministry offers the church a wonderful opportunity as we seek to share the good news of Jesus Christ and his promise of life in all its fullness with the communities we are called to serve. GS 2381 tells us that the work of the advisory group and the NSWP has led to several significant and encouraging outcomes. One of these outcomes is the development of sports and wellbeing ministry training pathways for lay and ordained leaders at Ridley Hall in Cambridge. I was principal of Ridley when this pathway was initiated. We partnered with Professor Andrew Parker in developing the pathway, and the fact that 40 people have studied on the sports ministry program in a relatively short period of time, and 10 of these to degree level, is testament to the depth and quality of Andrew's leadership in this field. Professor Parker is an enormous asset to the church in mission, and the report he co-authored with Mark Balcar, referenced in GS 2381, provides a compelling evidence base for the strategic opportunity provided to the church by sports and wellbeing ministry. The evaluation of the project in GS 2381 makes for encouraging reading and leads towards 3 conclusions with which I wholeheartedly agree and urge Synod to endorse by voting in favour of this motion. We note in GS 2381's first conclusion that sports and wellbeing ministry is a clear and obvious solution to helping dioceses achieve their strategic aims to make the church younger and more diverse, and to enable the growth of a mixed ecology. We also note in this first conclusion that more time and resources are needed in order to consolidate, innovate, and accelerate progress and learning to date. We celebrate the contribution of sports and wellbeing ministry in realizing our vision of a church which is younger and more diverse. And since we're celebrating, it would seem worthwhile to ensure that resources are made available to enable this ministry moving forward. GS 2381's second conclusion encourages the further embedding of sports and wellbeing ministry in the church's mission. Of course, sports and wellbeing ministry is not the only approach to mission, and it won't be effective everywhere. But it is important to recognize the valuable contribution of this approach in the big picture of sharing good news, especially in some of our most disadvantaged communities. In relation to the third of the conclusions, which highlights the importance of strategic leadership, I encourage those of us in a position to action this, to make it a priority. I will certainly be doing this in Birmingham. I warmly welcome the fruitful work being undertaken in this area. I support the motion and commend it to Synod. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Mr. Christopher Townsend to move his amendment standing at item 43. Mr. Townsend, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Christopher Townsend, Ely 305. Sport. Some of us love it, but some of us, well, not so much. But sport and wellbeing ministry, as we've heard, embraces not just conventional sport, but encouraging physical activity more generally, and promoting health and well-being in a wider sense. It is a way to express a theological conviction that God cares for the whole person, body, mind, and soul, whoever you are, whatever your age, and whatever your abilities. All that is true and important and has begun to be well expressed already in this debate. And yet I do want to draw attention to the potential of this ministry as a way to connect with those who are younger and unchurched, and so to make pathways to faith available. If time were with us, I would say more about the Wellbeing Hub now underway at St George's Littleport, a market town near Ely, with a parish nurse and, using a remaining tranche of SDF funding, a sports and wellbeing youth minister. Over the last year, his work in the local secondary school has led to a youth club of 20 or so at the church and nearly 70 young people on the church's books. In terms of journeys to faith, it's very, very early days. But St George's is making plans for a Friday night youth group which will offer more to introduce these young people to the Christian faith and to life in all its fullness in Jesus Christ. If we're serious about becoming a church that is younger and more diverse, developing this kind of ministry is a no-brainer. However, the research report we've been hearing about highlights the vital need for coordination, support, and strategic leadership at diocesan and national levels to harness the full potential of sport and wellbeing ministry, to address challenges it faces, to build partnerships and collaborations, to establish pathways to financial and leadership sustainability, and to embed sport and wellbeing ministry into wider planning for children and young people, for schools, for community outreach, for fresh expressions. Sports and wellbeing ministry is not a silver bullet, but in our current context, it is a valuable tool in the toolbox. Let's make the most of it. Let's build on the good work already begun. My amendment allows Synod to give an even more enthusiastic encouragement to this. I move the amendment standing in my name.
I therefore invite the Bishop of Derby to respond to that amendment.
We're very grateful for the amendment and are delighted to accept it as proposed.
The Bishop, having indicated her support of the amendment, item 43 is now open for debate. The speech limit currently remains 3 minutes. I call Sandy Turner, please, followed by Eleanor Smith.
Sandy Turner, Chelmsford 275. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Now, my husband plays a lot of sport, and his sport bag bears this one word: power. And sport at any level has the power to transform lives and promote well-being. But, Synod, there is more to life than sport and well-being. I support Christopher's amendment wholeheartedly because as Christians, we have the something more to offer. We have the powerful and transformative message of Jesus Christ as Lord, the gospel of forgiveness, of hope and love, the certainty of eternal life ahead. Jesus has the power to change lives forever. So sport, well-being and Jesus is a win-win. I'll give you 2 quick examples. At a Christian-run sports camp, where no question was too daft to ask, God kindly unstopped the ears of my daughter, who heard the gospel clearly for the first time, gave her life to Jesus and was utterly changed. She's now a youth leader in her local church and the youngest PCC member by a chunk. And last summer, my church ran an Olympic-themed holiday club in our primary school. It was utter chaos as teams GB, France, USA and Australia competed for prizes in a hall we had transformed into ancient Athens. Why Athens? Well, Olympics, yes, but actually we wanted to share the good news of Jesus from Acts 17. And on that day, seeds were planted and God kindly grew them, and families have since joined our congregation. Do you know, it would be great, wouldn't it, if all dioceses had a sport and wellbeing coordinator? But until that happens, we can all, in our local churches, Do a bit of sport and wellbeing ministry in small ways. Doesn't need to cost a lot, a five-a-side game for teens in the park, or an evening of craft or board games for families or seniors, are a great opportunity for us all to speak about Jesus. Let's not be daunted by it as Christians. We've got the transformative Holy Spirit within us to help. So support the ministry, be unashamed of the gospel. Give glory to God as he builds his kingdom. Please support the amendment. Thank you.
Eleanor Smith, Southwark 416, thank you for calling me. As part of this debate, I wanted to speak in favour of this amendment, and particularly Part B, and draw Synod's attention to the continuing excellent work of one of the organisations that Bishop Libby mentioned. She mentioned Christians in Sport, KIC, and Sports Chaplaincy UK. And I wanted to just let you know a little bit about Sports Chaplaincy UK and commend their work to you, inviting you to work with them and alongside them. So for those of you who don't know, they're an ecumenical charity who have 270 chaplains throughout sport in England. They cover a multitude of sports from elite to grassroots, football, rugby, cricket, horse racing. To clarify, the chaplains there are for the people, not the horses. Athletics, hockey, various others. They've provided chaplaincy at national sports events as well. They have a voluntary capacity of chaplains, but they have a rigorous application and appointment process, and they are acknowledged within the sporting environment and by national governing bodies in sport, such as the Premier League, Football League and Professional Footballers Association. All have legal agreements in place with them for the provision of chaplaincy to ensure standards of training and accountability are adhered to. I know there are a number of sports chaplains here today, so if you would like to learn more about them, do come and talk to us or anyone else. I know Barney, I think, is around here somewhere, who's a sports chaplain, who might give you a wave if you're lucky. There he is. And I would just encourage the Darson Bishops, Darson Boards of Finance and Strategic Mission and Ministry Investment Board to increase their support and engagement with Sports Chaplaincy UK in any area of sports chaplaincy. Please do work with them, direct people to them if they're interested in becoming chaplains, and engage with National Sports Sunday, which is happening this year on the 11th of May. Thank you very much.
Synod, in light of the large number of people who wish to speak on this item, we are not able to bring this item to a conclusion. As required by Standing Order 15.7, I therefore adjourn the debate on the current item, item 43.